Imagine this. You wake up one morning, the same as always. The sun leaks through the blinds, painting golden lines on the walls. You rub the sleep from your eyes, stretch, and reach for your phone. A notification, a headline, a name you recognize, someone you once admired, respected, maybe even loved. But the words beside their name, unthinkable, a crime, a betrayal, a descent into something dark. You scroll through the details, searching for an explanation that makes sense. Maybe they were always like this, hiding behind a mask. Maybe they were manipulated, coerced. Or maybe, just maybe, they changed. Slowly, quietly over years. Not in an instant, not with a single choice, but through 1,000 tiny compromises, a gradual erosion of self. And then, the thought sneaks in like a whisper you don't want to hear. Could happen to you? The world is filled with stories of good people who became something else. The loving parent who turns abusive. The devoted leader who descends into corruption. The quiet neighbor who one day snaps. The philosopher who wrote about kindness yet justified the cruelest acts. Were they born this way? Was the monster always inside them, waiting? Or did something happen? Something that could happen to anyone? Something that could happen to you? Society clings to a comfortable lie. That good and evil are separate. That monsters are different from the rest of us. We tell ourselves that villains are born, not made. That there's a clear line between morality and depravity, a bright red boundary that only the wicked cross. But history, psychology, and personal experience all whisper a different truth, one we don't want to face. The truth is, darkness is not an outside force. It does not descend upon the weak-willed like a curse. It grows from within, watered by pain, by resentment, by fear. And it does not announce itself. It does not arrive with fanfare or warning. It creeps, inch by inch, disguised as necessity, as self-defense, as justice. Until one day, you look in the mirror and do not recognize the person staring back. Consider Carl Jung's idea of the shadow, the part of ourselves we refuse to acknowledge, the urges we suppress. The darkness we pretend is not there. Jung warned that to deny the shadow is to give it power, to allow it to grow unchecked, festering beneath the surface until it finds a way out. Sometimes, that way is a quiet bitterness, a slow hardening of the heart. Other times, it is something far worse. Nietzsche saw this too. Asterisk beware that, when fighting monsters, you yourself do not become a monster. For when you gaze long into the abyss also gazes into you. Asterisk, but what does that really mean? It means that the more we define ourselves in opposition to evil, the more we risk becoming it. The more we justify our own darkness in the name of righteousness, the more we lose sight of the line we swore we'd never cross. It is easy to judge those who have fallen, to watch a scandal unfold and think, I would never do that. But morality is not a static thing, and no one wakes up one morning and decides to be cruel, to betray, to destroy. It is the culmination of 1,000 choices, some so small they are barely noticed. A moment of resentment left unexamined. A betrayal justified as a necessary evil. A boundary crossed just once with the promise that it will never happen again. So we must ask ourselves, what forces shape this descent? What hidden mechanisms turn good intentions into something twisted? And more importantly, how do we recognize it before it's too late? Before the mirror reveals a face we no longer recognize? This is not just a question of history, of psychology, of philosophy. It is a question of you, of all of us. And the answer is waiting in the places we least want to look. Because the real danger is not the obvious monster, the predator, the tyrant, the villain in a mask. The real danger is the slow erosion of self, the insidious transformation that happens when we are not paying attention, when we justify, when we rationalize, when we believe we are immune. And so, we must look deeper. into the hidden forces that shape us, into the unseen hands that push us toward the abyss, into the truths we are afraid to face. Because until we do, none of us are safe from the slow, silent transformation that turns good people into something else. You think you know yourself. You believe in your own moral compass, your values, the lines you would never cross. But beneath that certainty, something lurks, something ancient, primal, and far more powerful than the carefully constructed identity you wear each day. Carl Jung called it the shadow, the collection of everything you reject about yourself, the dark mirror of your unconscious. It contains the urges you suppress, the rage you deny, the envy you pretend doesn't exist. But here's the terrifying part. The less you acknowledge it, the stronger it becomes. The more you repress your darkness, the more it controls you in ways you don't even realize. Imagine a person who prides themselves on kindness, on always doing the right thing. They avoid conflict. They never lash out. They see themselves as a beacon of goodness in a chaotic world. But what happens when their kindness is exploited? When life beats them down? When their generosity is met with betrayal? Resentment grows like a tumor. The shadow whispers, "This isn't fair. They don't deserve your kindness. Strike back." Nietzsche warned of this transformation, and thus spoke Zarathustra. Beware that, when fighting monsters, you yourself do not become a monster. But the irony is, it's not just those who fight monsters that risk becoming them. It's those who deny that monsters even exist within them. Society tells you to be good. But what does good even mean? Is it selflessness, obedience, the willingness to sacrifice for others? These virtues sound noble, but when taken to extremes, they can become the seeds of something horrifying. The selfless person who never asserts themselves eventually becomes the martyr, silent, suffering, secretly seething with resentment. The obedient worker, praised for their compliance, becomes incapable of questioning authority, following orders no matter how unjust. The idealist, driven by a vision of a better world, can become so convinced of their righteousness that they see those who disagree as enemies to be crushed. History is filled with examples of people who believed they were acting for the greater good, yet committed unspeakable horrors. Entire regimes were built on the backs of individuals who saw themselves as heroes, not villains. As Dostoyevsky wrote, "Nothing is easier than to denounce the evildoer. Nothing is more difficult than to understand him." But this isn't just about dictators and tyrants. This is about you, about the slow, imperceptible ways in which your own mind can betray you. Think about a time you were wronged. Maybe a friend betrayed your trust, or a partner left you when you needed them most. The hurt was deep, but what came next? A quiet voice in your head, whispering, "They deserve to suffer." Maybe you never acted on it. Maybe you buried it deep, but the thought was there, and it was real. Now imagine a lifetime of those moments stacking up, each one pressing against your psyche, shaping your worldview. The good person who believes in fairness starts to believe in revenge. The empathetic soul who once cared deeply for others becomes cold, detached, tired of being hurt. The monster isn't some external force. It's the gradual erosion of who you once were. Nobody believes they're the villain. The human mind is wired for self-justification. When we do something cruel, we don't see it as cruelty. We see it as justice, as self-defense, as something necessary. The brain distorts reality to protect the ego, making us blind to our own dissent. Psychologists call this cognitive dissonance, the discomfort of holding two contradictory beliefs. I am a good person versus I just hurt someone. Instead of admitting we might be in the wrong, we rationalize. They deserved it. They pushed me to this. I had no choice. Aldous Huxley once wrote, "The propagandist's purpose is to make one set of people forget that certain other sets of people are human." This doesn't just apply to political manipulation. It happens in everyday life. A bitter divorce turns once loving partners into enemies. A grudge festers until a simple misunderstanding becomes a war. You dehumanize those who hurt you until you can justify hurting them back. And so, without even realizing it, you cross the line. But how far can this go? What happens when unchecked resentment, suppressed rage, and moral blindness reach their breaking point? That's where we go next. You don't wake up one morning and decide to become a monster. No one does. That's what makes this transformation so insidious. It's not a single choice. It's a series of almost imperceptible shifts, a slow poisoning of the soul that you barely notice until one day you look in a mirror and don't recognize yourself. But the consequences of this shift are not just personal. They ripple outward, shaping entire societies, reshaping history itself. What happens when enough people, each carrying their own silent resentments and rationalized justifications, reach their breaking point? Look around. The world is filled with people who believe they're the victims of injustice. They don't see themselves as dangerous, only as wronged. They carry their wounds like banners, believing that their pain gives them the right, no, the duty, to strike back. When thousands, even millions, of individuals think this way, what follows is not justice. It is chaos. The neuroscience of the descent. Your brain is a battlefield. Every experience you have, every memory, every wound, leaves a mark. Neuroscience tells us that prolonged exposure to resentment, anger, and fear rewires the brain. The amygdala, the part responsible for processing threats, becomes hyperactive. You start to see danger everywhere, even where it doesn't exist. Meanwhile, the prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for rational thinking and empathy, begins to shut down. In other words, the more you nurture feelings of injustice, the more the world begins to look like a place filled with enemies. You stop seeing individuals, you see threats. You stop listening to reason, you react on instinct. The shift happens so gradually that you never question it. This is why revolutions built on righteous fury often turn into bloodbaths. Why once kind individuals, given enough betrayal and heartbreak, become bitter and cruel. Why the bullied child, if they do not heal, can become the abuser. Because when pain is left unchecked, it doesn't fade, it transforms. The social machine that feeds the monster. But it's not just the individual mind that fosters this transformation. Society itself encourages it. From a young age, you are taught simple narratives. Good versus evil. Heroes versus villains. Us versus them. You're told that justice must be served, that the righteous must prevail. But what if everyone believes they are the righteous? What if everyone believes the other side is the villain? Mass movements, ideological battles, even wars, all are driven by this fundamental error in perception. No one fights for evil. They fight because they believe they are protecting something, avenging something, correcting some deep cosmic wrong. Think about the workplace rival who sabotages a colleague, believing they're only evening the playing field. The religious zealot who justifies cruelty in the name of faith. The activist who, in their pursuit of justice, becomes consumed by hatred. The individual seeking revenge on society for personal failures. They all believe in their own virtue. But belief does not prevent destruction. The hidden price of becoming a monster. At first, turning to darkness can feel empowering. The person who once felt weak, overlooked, taken advantage of, now they are strong. Now they are feared. No longer the prey. They become the predator. But here's the truth no one talks about. Monsters are not free. Yes, they may gain power. Yes, they may feel untouchable. But beneath that surface, something else is happening. Their world shrinks. Their paranoia grows. They build walls around themselves, both literal and psychological, convinced that everyone is either a tool or a threat. The final stage of this transformation is not dominance. It is isolation. The monster, no matter how powerful, is always alone. And that is the final trap, because by the time they realize what they have become, it is often too late to turn back. But what if it wasn't? What if there was another way? That's where we go next. The rebellion. How to break free. What if everything you thought about strength, power, and justice was wrong? What if the real way to reclaim yourself, to prevent the descent into monstrosity, was not through retaliation, not through power, not through proving yourself to the world, but through something so counterintuitive that most people reject it outright? There is a reason so few escape the transformation into darkness. The path back is not easy. It is not instinctual. It demands something that goes against every fiber of the wounded mind. A rebellion, not against others, but against the very patterns that created the monster in the first place. The trap of vengeance. Why fighting fire with fire burns you first. The first step to breaking free is understanding the nature of vengeance. You have been taught that justice and revenge are different. That justice is noble, while revenge is selfish. But in the depths of the human psyche, they are not so easily separated. Once you have been hurt, the desire to strike back masquerades as righteousness. It whispers, they deserve it. This is balance. This is fairness. But look deeper. What really happens when you take vengeance? For a brief moment, there is relief, a rush of satisfaction, the illusion of control. But what follows? More pain, more enemies, more fuel for the fire. Retaliation begets retaliation. Resentment chains you to the very thing you hate. Nietzsche warned, "He who fights with monsters should be careful lest he thereby become a monster." And if you gaze long enough into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you. Vengeance does not break the cycle. It strengthens it. To escape, you must do something radical. You must let go of the belief that hurting others will heal you. This does not mean becoming passive. It does not mean tolerating injustice. It means understanding that true power is not in domination, but in liberation from the need to prove anything to anyone. Carl Jung's shadow work. Facing the beast within. If you want to stop becoming a monster, you must first acknowledge that you already have one inside you. Carl Jung called it the shadow, the suppressed, hidden aspects of your psyche that you deny, yet influence your every action. The anger, the envy, the insecurity, the fear. The part of you capable of cruelty. The part you refuse to look at. But here's the paradox. The more you reject your shadow, the stronger it controls you. It leaks into your actions, disguising itself as righteousness, as self-defense, as necessary aggression. The only way to master it is to confront it, to see your darkness fully, without shame, without denial, to recognize the moments when your pain is twisting your perception. Ask yourself, what am I pretending not to feel? Who am I really fighting? Them, or my own past? Would I still be this angry if I had nothing left to prove? True rebellion is refusing to be a puppet to your own wounds. It is reclaiming your ability to choose, to act from clarity, not from old pain. The power of self-sovereignty, rewriting the script. If you do not define yourself, the world will define you. If you do not choose your own narrative, you will live someone else's. Monsters are created through stories, stories they tell themselves about the world, about their pain, about their identity. Break free by rewriting the script. Schopenhauer believed that much of human suffering comes from attachment to external validation. The need to be seen as strong, successful, avenged. But what if you no longer needed that? What if you were already enough? Think of the most powerful people in history. Not the ones who conquered, but the ones who transcended. The ones who refused to be controlled by hate. Marcus Aurelius, who ruled an empire, yet practiced humility. Viktor Frankl, who survived the worst of humanity and still chose meaning over despair. These were men who understood. Your real enemy is not others. It is your own mind's enslavement to anger. To rebel is to rise above, to see the game for what it is, and refuse to play by its rules. There is one final test that separates those who escape the descent from those who do not. Letting go. Letting go of the narrative that you need revenge to be whole. Letting go of the belief that the world owes you something. Letting go of the past that still haunts your decisions. Most will not do this because it is easier to hold on, easier to justify the anger, easier to believe that becoming stronger means becoming harder, colder, untouchable. But the strongest people, the ones who truly win, are those who refuse to be consumed. The monster always promises power, but it only delivers chains. Are you ready to break them? Next, we uncover the ultimate truth, the final realization that changes everything. Imagine standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down into the abyss. For years, you have fought against the world, against injustice, against the ghosts of your past. You have worn your scars like armor, convinced that survival meant becoming harder, sharper, more untouchable. And yet, as you stare into the darkness below, a terrifying realization dawns upon you. The monster was never out there. It was always within. And now you have a choice. Not between good and evil, not between strength and weakness, but between truth and illusion. Between continuing to play a game that was designed to keep you trapped, or stepping beyond it entirely. From childhood, you were told a lie so pervasive, so insidious, that you never even thought to question it. That the world is against you. That life is a battlefield. That your pain makes you special. This belief fuels the transformation into monstrosity. It creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. When you see yourself as a victim of the world, you begin to act like one. You justify your anger. You rationalize your destruction. You say, I had no choice. But what if you did? What if the ultimate deception was the idea that you had to become monstrous to survive? That you had to be cold to be strong? That you had to destroy to win? This is the final trap, the last chain. And the only way to break it is to realize you were never powerless to begin with. The only real power, transcending the game. If revenge doesn't free you, if becoming ruthless only tightens the chains, then what is the answer? Transcendence. The only real power is the ability to step outside the script entirely, to refuse to be defined by pain, to no longer react to the world from a place of fear. Consider the greatest minds in history, the ones who faced unimaginable suffering and yet emerged untouchable, not because they overpowered their enemies, but because they realized nothing outside of you has the right to control you. Viktor Frankl, in the depths of a Nazi concentration camp, understood that even in chains, he was free because his mind was his own. Marcus Aurelius, surrounded by betrayal and war, ruled an empire with wisdom instead of vengeance. He knew that no insult, no injustice, had the power to make him lose himself. The Buddha, after years of self-inflicted suffering, saw through the illusion entirely, realizing that attachment to anger, to control, to identity itself, was the true prison. The lesson is clear. You do not win by fighting harder. You win by no longer needing to fight at all. Because the moment you stop needing to prove anything, your power, your worth, your pain, you become untouchable. Now, we return to you. You have seen the path. You have understood how good people turn into monsters, not through a single moment of weakness, but through a slow, insidious deception. The belief that survival requires brutality, that justice requires revenge, that strength requires suffering. But now, you know the truth. The real test is not whether you can win the war. It is whether you can choose not to play it at all. Because the moment you step beyond it, beyond the need to prove, beyond the need to retaliate, you enter a space of true power. A space where no insult, no betrayal, No past wound can control you. This is the final rebellion, the final choice. So ask yourself, are you ready to stop fighting ghosts? Are you ready to let go of the monster before it consumes you? Or will you, like so many before you, mistake the chains for power? The abyss has always been staring back at you. The only question is, will you step away from the edge? If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss out on future content. More thought-provoking videos are coming your way.